Let's talk now to Zoe Gardner from the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. Zoe, thank you for joining us this morning on BBC News as well. At a time when people in the UK have shown a huge amount of compassion and support for refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine, what do you make of this policy?
Well, thank you for having me, Anita. Yes, I have to echo the sentiments that have been expressed already. This policy is despicable. It's an absolute disgrace. The people of this country have shown time and again that we are warm and we are welcoming and we want to help refugees fleeing persecution. We've shown that with Ukraine. We also saw an incredibly generous and open-hearted response to the crisis in Afghanistan. The government is completely out of step with the public here. We simply cannot support sending vulnerable refugees who may be victims of torture, who may have survived atrocities and war, and packing them off halfway around the world to a poor country. It is despicable.
Is the government out of step with all of the public, though? Because, you know, clearly people who support the government have listened to what it said about taking back control of borders, and the government would argue, we heard Adam Fleming say this was actually a one-way ticket to Rwanda for people who have arrived in the UK illegally. So, you know, what's the government to do if it is to try to manage this system?
What does a one-way ticket mean to somebody who has already made a journey through hell, you know, experiencing the enormous risk of death, enormous risk of trafficking, abuse, slavery, to finally make it to safety in the UK, where they believe that this is the best place for them, perhaps because they have family or language connections, or they've worked with our military as interpreters. What does it mean, a one-way ticket? All this is funneling a huge amount of taxpayer money into new smuggling routes to bring people back out of Rwanda. This is absolutely not going to work. The way that you stop people getting on those dangerous boats, as all of us want to do, is you offer people safe alternative ways to travel. This will not make refugees disappear. This is another desperate and cruel attempt by this government to distract from its own political difficulties by blaming foreigners for our problems. It is not going to work, and it is really, truly shameful that we would even consider it.
Tell us a bit more about your concerns specifically around Rwanda, and how does this plan sit within the UK's obligations under international law?
Well, it's very questionable whether it would be legal under our obligations under the Refugee Convention, which is about protecting people fleeing persecution. So we don't know the details. I mean, we're obviously hoping that the Prime Minister will give us more details in his speech, but I fear that instead we'll just get more rhetoric about strong borders, which is meaningless in practice because this doesn't work. What we know is that they want to send men to Rwanda. Well, will we send a man who worked with the British military as an interpreter from Afghanistan? And if we won't, how will we identify that that's who that person is? Well, that's why we have an asylum system in this country. And what we actually need to do is invest in an asylum system that works quickly and fairly and lets people rebuild their lives here in safety when they're fleeing persecution. And instead, what we're talking about is sending people off to a country which is not democratic. We're going to be paying a dictator huge amounts of British taxpayer money to detain refugees halfway around the world, a country which does not have a free press, a country which does not respect the rights of LGBT people. This is absolutely unacceptable.
I think you have accepted, though, there is a problem with small boats and the sheer numbers of people coming across the channel and the dangerous nature of those crossings, Zoe.
Absolutely. And as I begged and pleaded for at the time, JCWI has solutions to offer that would create safe ways for people to travel. When 27 men, women and children lost their lives in the freezing waters of the Channel in November, we don't know how many other people die at other points along this terribly dangerous journey. We need a new approach, not this same old rubbish that has failed us. This isn't a new suggestion, by the way. Israel has had an agreement in place with Rwanda to return refugees since 2013. And what has happened, we have clear evidence that the people get detained, they get beaten up in prison, and then they pay smugglers to escape. And then they go along those terribly dangerous journeys. They get trafficked, they're subjected to slavery along the way. This is just about fueling the same tired, failed and cruel logic of closing off our borders, pushing people away, out of sight, out of mind, it doesn't relieve the suffering. Please, can we be spared the idea that this is some kind of humanitarian solution? This is about saying this isn't our problem and the UK won't take responsibility, and that does not reflect the position of the British public.
Zoe Gardner, thank you very much for your time. Zoe Gardner there from the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants.